The god of dreams enters the domain of war. The basement of the psyche is about to empty into the streets. And the question that has been asked every 165 years returns. When every unexamined shadow claims divine authority, whose fire prevails? The pattern is clear. The precedents are written in blood and birth. The archetype activates whether we acknowledge it or not. What remains is choice. Not whether to enter the fire, but whether you are committed to the ongoing practice of self-love and gratitude that will help you meet whatever the fire reveals, again and again, for as long as the transit lasts. Welcome to the Weekly Transit, your guide to understanding the current planetary and astral alignments. Together, we'll explore how to harness these cosmic frequencies, empowering you to reach your highest potential as you navigate the days ahead. I'm your host, Scott Tajarian. Welcome to the Weekly Transit. This is the week of January 26th to February 1st, where we will be covering only 4 transits this week. 4 transits. The last 2 weeks we've had 14 transits each week, and this week just 4 transits. 2 big ones. The highlights are Neptune transiting into Aries and the full moon in Leo. So, I've got 2 Substack essays to share with you this week, historical dives. I wanted to share the first one last week because, I wanted to talk about the 5 planets in Aquarius. The sun, first time the Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Pluto have all been in Aquarius since February of 1791. So that is a very, very powerful historical configuration. And I went back and to 811, because this has happened. This is the one, let's see, 1, 2, 3. This is the 5th time since 811. This happened in 811, 1302, 1535, and 1791. So felt it was important to dive into this. So let's check out this Substack article first, or essay first, to begin the week. When 5 planets gather in Aquarius from January 23rd to February 6th, 2026, the Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Pluto all transit through Aquarius, the fixed air sign symbolized by the water bear and ruled by Saturn, the god of wealth and time, the planet of restriction, achievement, and authority, as well as Uranus, the planet of rebellion, revolution, and the unexpected. This is the first time these 5 heavenly bodies have converged in Aquarius at the same time since February of 1791. We look back at the last 4 times this occurred, and what society reflected was shocking. The historical pattern: 5 planets in Aquarius. January 811. 3 empires fractured simultaneously. In the early 9th century, 3 empires dominated the known world: the Carolingian Empire in the west, the Byzantine Empire in the east, and the Abbasid Caliphate across the Islamic world. In January of 811, with the Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Pluto gathered in Aquarius, all 3 began to crack. The Carolingian Empire was reaching its twilight. Charlemagne, the first Holy Roman Emperor, wrote his final will in 811. His carefully laid succession plans had already been destroyed. His son, Charles the Younger, died in 810. Pepin of Italy in 811. The Treaty of Heiligen, signed that same year, established peace with Denmark, but the Danes who signed that treaty would return within a generation as Vikings, and Charlemagne's unified Europe would splinter into fragments that would war for centuries. The Byzantine Empire suffered one of its most catastrophic defeats in history. At the Battle of Pliska On July 26, 811, Emperor Nicephorus I was killed, the first Byzantine empire to die in battle in 433 years, since Valens fell at Adrianople in 738 CE. Khan Krum of Bulgaria had the emperor's skull lined with silver and used as a drinking cup, the most documented instance of this gruesome custom in history. The defeat marked Bulgaria's rise as a major Balkan power and began Constantinople's long decline. The Abbasid Caliphate descended into civil war. The fourth fitna formally began in 811, when Caliph Al-Amin declared war on his brother, Al-Mamun. In March, Al-Amin dispatched 40,000 troops eastward. They were defeated at the Battle of Rai. The war would culminate in Baghdad's siege and Al-Amin's execution in 813. The Caliphate would never fully recover. Regional fragmentation followed that would reshape the Islamic world for centuries. 3 empires, 3 continents, 3 fractures, all with the Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Pluto in Aquarius. The pattern had announced itself. When these 5 planets gather in the sign of the water bearer, the structures that hold civilization together begin to crack, and new orders rise from the rubble. January 1302, the first cracks in medieval order. The year 1302 witnessed what historians call the first successful democratic revolt in medieval Europe. The Battle of the Golden Spurs saw an untrained Flemish infantry militia, consisting mainly of members of the craft guilds, weavers, fullers, and the common folk, defeat a professional force of French cavalry. The population of the towns did not want to be governed according to noble whims. For that reason, the towns regularly rebelled in order to assert their common interests. The frequency of such democratic revolts was much higher in the southern part of the Low Countries than anywhere in medieval Europe. The aftermath was revolutionary. The guilds, which had contributed heavily to the Flemish cause, were officially recognized. After 1302, the guilds of Bruges and Ghent obtained a far-reaching say in local government. Simultaneously, Dante Alighieri, the poet visionary, was exiled from Florence on January 27, 1302, and Pope Boniface VIII was locked in his fatal conflict with Philip IV of France, issuing Unum Sanctum in November, the most extreme assertion of papal supremacy in history, which would ultimately destroy him and fracture the Church's authority. The knightly order began to decline. The common people glimpsed their power. The structure that held medieval society together started to crack. February 1535. Utopia dies. Democracy is born. The Munster Rebellion represents perhaps the most dramatic Aquarian experiment in history. The city was under Anabaptist rule from February 1534, when the city hall was seized and Bernard Knipperdolling installed as mayor, until its fall in June 1535. What happened there reads like a fever dream of Aquarian ideals pushed to their extremes. Munster became the headquarters of a radical experiment in revolutionary millenarianism, identified as the New Jerusalem by followers of Melchi Hoffman. It was transformed into the capital of an Anabaptist kingdom. Rebaptism was made compulsory. Goods were held in common. Polygamy was legalized. The property of emigrants was shared out with the poor, and soon a proclamation was issued that all property was to be held in common. The Commune was crushed violently in June 1535, but that same year saw Thomas More, author of Utopia, executed in July. And in October, the first complete English Bible was printed with translations by William Tyndale and Miles Coverdale, democratizing sacred knowledge that had been hoarded by elites for centuries. The tension was exquisite. Utopia's author dies, a utopian commune collapses, but the tool that would ultimately democratize knowledge, the vernacular Bible, enters the world. February 1791, the Age of Revolution. This is perhaps the most concentrated expression of Aquarian energy in recorded history. Paine's Rights of Man was printed by London publisher Joseph Johnson for publication on 21st of February 1791. It sold as many as 1 million copies and was eagerly read by reformers, Protestant dissenters, Democrats, London craftsmen, and the skilled factory hands of the new industrial North. That same year saw the U.S. Bill of Rights ratified on December 15, 1791, defining citizens' rights in relation to the newly established government under the Constitution, guaranteeing freedom of religion, speech, and the press, and the rights of peaceful assembly and petition. And on the night of August 21st to the 22nd, 1791, the slaves of Saint-Domingue rose in revolt. Thousands of slaves attended a secret voodoo ceremony as a tropical storm came in. The lightning and the thunder were taken as auspicious omens, and later that night, the slaves began to kill their masters and plunged the colony into civil war. The Haitian Revolution was the first country to be founded by former slaves, the first successful slave revolt in history. 3 revolutions, 3 continents, all with the Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Pluto in Aquarius. January 23rd to February 6, 2026. What the pattern suggests. The current moment rhymes disturbingly with all 4 previous occurrences. Artificial intelligence is entering a decisive phase, one defined less by speculative breakthroughs than by the hard realities of governance, adoption, and strategic competition. The challenge is no longer whether AI will reshape society, but how and under whose rules. AI is a revolutionary technology. The near-term threat is not superhuman machines, but the decline of thinking, feeling, and social humans. Half of employers plan to reorient their businesses in response to AI. 2/3 plan to hire talent with specific AI skills, while 40% anticipate reducing their workforce where AI can automate tasks. The parallels to 1535 are particularly striking. Like the Munster Anabaptists who believed they were building the New Jerusalem, Silicon Valley utopians believe they are building a new world. Like the printing press that democratized knowledge while also spreading propaganda, AI democratizes creation while also fabricating reality. And like 1791, we face fundamental questions about rights. Who owns AI-generated work? Who has the right to not be replaced by machines? Who decides what intelligence means when it can be manufactured? The parallels to 8/11 may be the most sobering. 3 empires that seemed eternal, that had dominated their regions for generations, all fractured within the same year. Today, the post-World War II international order, the American-led global system, and the assumptions of liberal democracy all show cracks that would have seemed unthinkable a generation ago. The questions this configuration asks: if the historical pattern holds, this 2-week window January 23rd to February 6, 2026, represents not a culmination, but a seeding, a moment when the terms of a longer transformation are set. What collective structure is now so ossified that it no longer serves the people it was built to protect? What revolutionary force is gathering that will eventually topple it, whether we're ready or not? What form of knowledge or power is about to be democratized? And what will be lost when everyone has access to what was once guarded by the few? What new form of belonging is struggling to be born, and what old forms of belonging must die to make room for it? Where in your own life are you clinging to Saturnian structures, security, status, tradition that are no longer serving your growth? And where is the Uranian lightning already striking? The empires of 811 did not know they were ending an era. The weavers of Bruges did not know they were ending feudalism. The slaves of Saint Domingue did not know they were becoming the age of abolition. Thomas Paine did not know his pamphlet would sell 1 million copies. The question is not whether transformation is coming. The historical record is clear. When these 5 planets gather in Aquarius, old orders die and new ones are conceived. The question is what you will do with the 2 weeks as the seed is planted. You can read that on my Substack. And thinking about the history, it's kind of heavy. But in thinking about Aquarius and just thinking about my own life, and I just want to reflect for a minute on what's been going on with me, because I know last week I think I was kind of maybe heavy about like the Capricorn stuff was just, intense for, those of us maybe in the mid 70s, late 70s, mid 70s who were born with Chiron and Aries. Anyone that has those Aries placements getting hit really hard by the Capricorn planets. And all those planets in Capricorn ruled by Saturn, restriction, like holding us down, the weight of the earth, holding us back. I felt a real shift as the planet started to move into Aquarius. I felt a lightness. I was like, okay, I think I can get through this. And it just made me think, it's like Aquarius is fixed air. And when I think of fixed air, I think about where is your vibration? There's a guy who I used to work with at the restaurant who was, he was an Aquarius, and he complained more than anyone at the restaurant. Always just like, I can't believe they're doing this, and why are they doing this, and what's going on here, and I just always grumbling about something. And when I got into astrology, and it became like kind of the thing at the restaurant where it's like, oh yeah, you want to know about yourself, go talk to Scott. He came up to me and he said, what do you know about Aquarius? And I said, Aquarius is fixed air. Fixed is stable. But the air, where is that air? If you're down here singing those low notes, if your vibration is low, then you're going to bring everybody down. If your vibration is high, then you're going to bring everybody up. And he was like, oh my God, yeah, that's totally, I see that. And his vibration changed. He started watching himself. He started noticing when he was complaining, and he pulled back. And he turned his life around. He met a woman. They fell in love. They had a baby. He became a father. Kind of like me. He was like in his 50s, I think, when it happened. I have to look in, late 40s, early 50s. But his whole life shifted. And so, I read to you and I share with you, and I write about what's happening historically, just to give you insight into what's happening from a historical perspective. But I think it's most important to really think about yourself within the fabric of these planetary alignments and really think about what is the vibration that you are bringing to the collective. Is it a high vibration or is it a low vibration? And so I really think that the theme right now is to have an attitude of gratitude. An attitude of gratitude. When I was in the heaviness of all that Capricorn energy, I was going down a rabbit hole, and I somehow ended up looking on the Wikipedia page of the San Francisco Bridge and all the Golden Gate Bridge and all the suicides that happened or have happened over history on the Golden Gate Bridge. And it's very sobering and it's very sad. And the thing that really stood out to me was of the few people who survived the fall, pretty much every single one of them said that as soon as they jumped, they regretted it. As soon as they jumped, they regretted it. This life is so sacred. So sacred. I look at my little children as I hold them in my hands, their tiny bodies. There's so much power and energy in their little bodies when their little bodies are so fragile. And I just want to share my gratitude with all of you who are listening. It's because of you that I am supporting my family. All of you that have scheduled a reading with me. All of you who meet with me weekly or bi-weekly or monthly. You're really keeping me afloat. I'm able to support my wife and my 2 children because of you. And the honor for me to do that is knowing that what I'm sharing with you is helping you. And to me, that is a beautiful reflection of the Aquarius energy. What are you bringing to the collective? And today, I'm so grateful. I met with 2 clients that I see regularly. And I love meeting with my clients because they're so excited to talk with me and share with me what's going on in their life and listen to my reflections from an astrological perspective. And then they compensate me financially. I walked about 15,000 steps through my beautiful neighborhood with my 2 beautiful children as I attempted to give my wife 2 hours of sleep because she was exhausted. And now I'm here with you. And I'm able to be here with you and to share the knowledge with you because you appreciate what I'm sharing. And so I want to be very mindful to come on to this episode or to this podcast every week and to make sure that I'm bringing a high vibration, a vibration that is supporting you and encouraging you and empowering you and helping you recognize that you are not a victim to these transits. The planets, or the creator of these planets that are affecting us here on Earth, loves you. And whatever pain you're feeling right now, like the joy you have felt, is fleeting. I have been pushed to my limits these first almost 8 weeks. My twins are almost 2 months old. I've been pushed to my limits. I feel like I had postpartum depression. I mean, I can't tell you how intense these 2 months have been. But I feel like we've turned a corner. And I'm so grateful for the love and support of my wife and my family and my friends and my clients and all of my ancestors from my past. People from my past, people that I haven't talked to. I try to, when things are tough, I try to think of every nice moment that I've had in my life. I try to remember those moments. Remind myself that this too shall pass. And with this Aquarian energy, we're being called to really elevate ourselves through the suffering and come together collectively with a vibration where we are all lifting each other up. So what are you doing to raise the vibration of the people around you, your community, your clubs, groups, working environment that you're a part of? What are you doing to elevate the energy? That's the gift here right now. The first transit of the week, Neptune in Aries. We're going to close out with a Substack essay on Neptune and Aries. And by the way, I am going to begin offering a membership on Spotify. And I'm not sure how it works if you're listening on Apple or another podcast platform, if you'll be able to receive this content. But I'm going to use the content that I'm creating for those who are members of my Substack, who are paid subscribers to my Substack, where I've created this sort of series called 5 Core Questions, where we look at 5 core questions for like the new moon, the full moon, Venus in Aquarius, or a planet, transiting through a sign. And when we're looking at a planet transiting through a sign, we go through each transit they're going to make with other planets as they transit through that sign, and we boil it down to 5 questions that are going to help guide you through that transit. So I'm going to open up membership, a paid membership, $5 a month, different from the Substack. The Substack is audio, visual, and the written word, whereas Spotify will just be audio and visual. And I'm going to share these, it's kind of like micro podcasts, micro episodes. Are going to be shorter. So still going to be doing the weekly transit like I do it, but then, this extra content. So, but I got a lot to share with you about Neptune transiting through Aries, and Neptune transits into Aries. So on Monday, January 26th, Neptune transits into Aries, where it will remain until May 21st, 2038, at which point it transits into Taurus, but then retrogrades back into Aries on October 21st, 2038, and then finally moves out of Aries on March 23rd, 2039. Now, Neptune transited through Aries. We had a taste of this last year from March 30th to October 22nd. But this is the long stretch. We've got like 12 years, 12 straight years. And then, it kind of continues for another bit after that, like a 6-month stretch. But we've got like 12 years of Neptune in Aries. This is the god of freshwater and the sea, the planet of illusion, deception, compassion, intuition, in the cardinal fire sign symbolized by the ram, and ruled by Mars, the god of war, Aries. So I don't want to say too much about this because I've got a very in-depth Substack essay that I want to share with you at the end of the episode. So let's move on to the second transit of the week. Just understand that this is what's coloring our reality for some time now. For the next 12 years is Neptune in Aries. So I'm going to get into what that means. But the second transit of the week, Mars forms a conjunction with Pluto and Aquarius. So last week we had Venus, Mercury, and the Sun all forming that conjunction with Pluto and Aquarius. This week it is Mars, the god of war, joining forces with Pluto, the god of death, in Aquarius, the fixed air sign symbolized by the water bear. This aspect, this conjunction is exact on Tuesday, January 27th. But this is something that we're feeling from Saturday, January 24th until Thursday, January 29th. So this is about a 5-day period where things might be super intense. Like especially, look at your chart. If you don't know your chart, you want a reading, you want some insight, contact me for a reading at theweeklytransit.com. I would love to share the knowledge with you. But if you are familiar with your chart, look at what is it 3 degrees, 2 degrees, 4 degrees, right around 3 degrees in the air and fire signs. The air signs are Libra, Aquarius, and Gemini. The fire signs are Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. If you have something around 2, 3, 4 degrees in the air and fire signs, you're getting a boost this week. You're being energized in some way. Like if you have Venus, let's say in Libra at 3 degrees, you're getting a jolt to your relationship. You may feel energized and excited. You may feel a stronger sense of attraction. If you were born with Saturn, let's say at 3 degrees in Sagittarius, you are getting a boost towards exerting your authority, taking action to accomplish whatever goals you've set out to achieve. But if you were born with key astrological points or planets around 3 degrees in Scorpio or Taurus, you're feeling some of that crunch right now. There might be conflicts happening for you. You might be going through a challenging transformation. If you were born with the sun at 3 degrees in Scorpio, that's for people that were born like right around October 24th, 25th. You're going through a really challenging transformation of your identity. So take it easy on yourself. This transit of Mars conjunct Pluto is helping us take the action that we need to take in order to open up, to connect with the community, to be open to the transformations that are occurring within our society, to exert our independence within the construct of the group. How's this transit affecting you? I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment on Spotify or YouTube. Love hearing from you. The third transit of the week, another conjunction, Mercury and Venus, also in Aquarius. These two have been riding side by side for some time. They form an exact conjunction on Thursday, January 29th, but they've been within a couple degrees of each other. I mean, we got to go back to January 23rd, Friday. So last Friday, all the way until, they're within a couple degrees of each other until this Sunday. So from last Friday to this Sunday, it's pretty rare that these two are that close to each other for so long. Actually, I'd say, they're within 2 degrees of each other until February 3rd. So from Friday the 23rd until Tuesday the 3rd, Mercury, the messenger of the gods, guide of souls to the underworld, the planet of consciousness, communication, coordination, the god of merchants and thieves, and Venus, the goddess of love and beauty, the planet of relationships, are transiting side by side in Aquarius. This is really helping us sort of detach any codependency that exists within your relationships might be shaken loose. The shackles that are keeping you tied to the relationships in manners that you don't want to be tied, or maybe they're coming undone. It's helping us broaden out our perspective and to communicate from that perspective of my unique voice. What is my unique voice? What ways am I articulating myself in my relationships that's unique to me? There could be or should be undoubtedly a lot of conversation and communication during this period with so many planets in an air sign. This is a great time for opening up discussions and really trying to broaden the perspective of what it means to love somebody. Maybe this is the moment where you recognize that, one person isn't meant to fill and check every single box of what I need. That doesn't mean that you need an open relationship or, being polyamorous or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. But, the reality is that your special somebody is not going to check every box for you. I mean, maybe there's people out there that, hit me up if that's you. If you say like, my partner hits every single box and I do for them, good for you. I celebrate you. You are in the minority because most people, they look at their partner and they're like, okay, I love this like 70% of what this person's bringing. But, it's like I think about Gabrielle and I. Like, I love sports. She doesn't. She doesn't like sports. Should I be upset with her because she doesn't want to sit down and watch a football game with me? No. That's not what she's into. So we're not going to sit down and watch football or baseball or any other sport together because that's not what she's interested in. And doing that and trying to push her into that is, that's like the antithesis of Aquarius. It's the shadow of Aquarius, where it's like, if you don't look like me, you don't talk like me, you don't act like me, you don't think like me, then there's something wrong with you. And really the higher frequency of Aquarius is like, we like different things. There's a lot of things that we like that's the same, but then there's several things that, we're not on the same page about, and that's okay. We don't have to be. What this Venus-Mercury conjunction is doing is helping facilitate the conversations that need to be had in order to clear the air, where you can literally look at your partner and say, you know what, it's okay that you don't like knitting. I do, you don't. That's not a deal breaker for me. It's like that song. You say tomato, I say tomato. Let's call the whole thing off, but it's like, no, we're not going to call the whole thing off. We're different, and we need to respect our differences, and we need to respect the differences of our likes and dislikes. Of course, in most relationships, you want there to be more that you vibe with the person than what you don't vibe with them about. Otherwise, it's probably not going to last. But this is about recognizing that there are other people out there to help fill those needs. I'll go watch sports with my buddies. They like it. My lady doesn't. That's okay. And then leading us to the final transit of the week, the full moon in Leo, which is happening on Sunday, February 1st at 2:09 p.m. at 13 degrees, the Aries degree of Leo. This is, the full moon is a release, and this is such a powerful release too, because we've literally got here, 5 planets in Aquarius, all anchoring to this full moon in Leo, and the full moon is a release. It's a release of the energy that we need to release in order for our intentions that we set during that new moon in Capricorn. It's like this is the baggage that we need to leave at the base camp so that we can ascend to the top of the mountain and achieve our goals. Leo is fixed fire. It's ruled by the sun. It's symbolized by the lion. The lion's the king of the jungle. The lion is that creature that if you go to the zoo, you go to the circus, you go to Africa, what do you want to see? The lion. It's center stage. But when you think about that new moon in Capricorn that we experienced a couple weeks ago, setting your intentions to build something that is truly worth your time and your energy. What is the mountain that you want to climb to the top of? In order to get to the top of the mountain, you need help. Even that guy who climbed Mount Everest the first time, Sir Edmund Hillary. There was the Sherpa, who nobody knows the name to. I'd have to look it up myself. Who helped him climb up the mountain. He deserves as much credit as Sir Edmund Hillary. So, who is helping you climb to the top of the mountain? Who is helping you climb to the top of the mountain? It might be one person, it might be a dozen people. And I want to give this guy his due. I can't talk about Sir Edmund Hillary and not talk about the Sherpa, Tenzing Norgay. Tenzing Norgay. Tenzing Norgay. Yeah, let's give Tenzing Norgay his due. Because Tenzing Norgay, the Nepalese Indian Sherpa, also climbed to the top of Mount Everest with Sir Edmund Hillary. So, and this is sort of what the full moon in Leo is about. Leo is the star. And so we need to release that arrogance. And I'm not saying Sir Edmund Hillary was arrogant. Maybe he gave Tenzing Norgay all his due and said, hey, this guy, I wouldn't have been here without him and he wouldn't have been here without me, and we did it together. That's really kind of more the Aquarius vibe. What is the arrogance and ego and, it's like the king that wakes up in the morning and is like, where's my breakfast? And is just berating everyone for not doing, what they're supposed to do. This is where we need to release that arrogance, because that arrogance is holding us back from ascending to the top of the mountain. It's kind of like if Sir Edmund Hillary said, I don't need anyone's help. I'm going to climb to the top by myself. And he'd still be frozen at the top of the mountain because he needed help to get there. So think about your new moon intentions in Capricorn and what you are working to achieve, what the intentions that you set for your goals and ambitions. And in what ways are you being arrogant, or what ways are you trying to cling to the spotlight? You trying to get all the attention? It's all about you. Those frequencies are what needs to be released during this full moon in Leo. That's why I wanted to give my gratitude to everybody listening to this podcast, because I wouldn't be living in this house, in this neighborhood that I love. I wouldn't be able to feed my children and my wife, who feeds our children. I'm not feeding my children. My wife's feeding our children, but I'm feeding her. I wouldn't be able to do that without you. Without everyone who's scheduled a reading, everyone who listens to the podcast, everyone who works with me on a regular basis. It's because of you that I'm able to live my life and support the people that I love and care about. And in turn, I hope that what I'm sharing with you is supporting you in a meaningful way that empowers you through the week. And that's what this full moon is about. With that, I want to say that we've got a class coming up, which is going to cover the next round of the lunar cycle, which is the solar eclipse in Aquarius and the lunar eclipse in Virgo. So if you are interested in the next lunar cycle and the eclipses, I've got a 1-hour class where we're going to cover everything, including what it means in each and every house, all 12 houses. So you can apply that to your own chart. You can enroll at theweeklytransit.com. But spend time this Sunday just opening your heart. And it's really about releasing the fears of not being noticed, not being remembered. You will be when you remember the people around you that are supporting you. Now let's dive deep into this Neptune in Aries. Neptune in Aries. Wow. This is going to be a ride, folks. This is going to be a ride, and I'm excited about it. I'm looking forward to it. I'm also nervous about it, but not really. I'm not nervous. But I'm intrigued. I'm wondering, like, what's going to happen? Let's see what's going to happen. And that's why I do these Substack essays, because I want to look and see what happened all those years ago and what the patterns have been. So I titled this The Divine Right of I. Neptune in Aries and the spiritualization of the self. When the god of dreams enters the sign of the warrior, and the shadow you refuse to face becomes the enemy you're willing to kill. On January 26, 2026, Neptune crosses out of Pisces and enters Aries, the cardinal fire sign ruled by Mars, the god of war. Neptune is the god of freshwater and the sea, ruler of dreams, disillusion, master of illusion and compassion, the force that dissolves whatever it touches until boundaries become meaningless. For 14 years in Pisces, Neptune asked something intimate. Go into your depths. Face the basement of your psyche. Look at what you've stored there. The guilt over what you've done. The shame over who you are. The regret over what you didn't do. The blame you've never released. And then show yourself compassion. Integrate those shadow patterns with understanding, forgiveness, and love. That was the invitation. That was the curriculum. We largely refused. We reached for the opioid instead of the feeling, the scroll instead of the silence, the screen instead of the mirror. We medicated, numbed, disassociated, and performed wellness while rotting inside. We built elaborate escape mechanisms to avoid the basement, and the basement only grew fuller, darker, more volatile. I recognize this pattern because I've watched it emerge in my own psyche. I never touched opioids, but during Neptune's years in Pisces, I used cannabis daily, from the moment I woke up until the moment I went to sleep, a way of avoiding sustained contact with myself. I've since put both cannabis and alcohol down, but the screen, the endless distraction, remains my greatest challenge. Now Neptune enters Aries. Aries is the ram, the warrior, the self. It is the first sign of the Zodiac, the primal declaration of I exist. Aries doesn't negotiate. It doesn't dissolve. It asserts. When Neptune enters Aries, whatever guilt, shame, regret, and blame hasn't been dealt with doesn't disappear. It doesn't stay quietly submerged. It gets pushed into the streets and lit ablaze like a dumpster fire. The shadow made righteous. Here is what we must understand about Neptune in Aries. When Neptune enters Aries, whatever guilt, shame, regret, and blame hasn't been dealt with doesn't disappear. It doesn't stay quietly submerged. It gets pushed into the street and lit ablaze like a dumpster fire. The shadow made righteous. Here is what we must understand about Neptune in Aries. It doesn't merely inflate the ego. It spiritualizes the shadow. When you cannot face your own guilt, you project it outward. The guilt becomes accusation. They are the guilty ones. When you cannot sit with your own shame, it becomes aggression, attack, before you can be exposed. When regret festers unprocessed, it curdles into blame. Someone must be responsible, and it cannot be me. This is human psychology. We all do it to some degree, but Neptune in Aries adds a devastating amplifier. It wraps these projections in divine authority. I'm not avoiding my shadow. I'm defending sacred truth. I'm not projecting my guilt. I'm fighting evil. I'm not running from my shame. I'm on a holy mission. When you spiritualize your shadow, anyone who challenges it becomes a threat not to your ego, but to your soul. That's when ideology becomes crusade. That's when disagreement becomes heresy. That's when you can look at your own brother and see an enemy worth killing. This is not speculation. This is pattern recognition. 5 times in the past 8 centuries, Neptune has transited Aries. Each time, the same crisis emerged. Unintegrated psychological material erupting into violence, justified by claims of divine purpose. (1206 to 1220). Kill them all. God will know his own. When the mirror holders became the enemy. The earliest Neptune and Aries transit in our examination produced the starkest example of spiritualized shadow in Christian history. By the late 12th century, a reform movement had taken root in southern France. The Cathars, from the Greek katharoi, meaning the pure ones, looked at the Catholic Church and named what they saw: corruption, hypocrisy, clergy who preached poverty while living in luxury, priests who demanded celibacy while keeping mistresses, an institution that had drifted so far from Christ's teaching that the Cathars called it the Church of the Devil. The Cathars were holding up a mirror. They lived simply. Their priests, the perfecti, owned nothing, imposed no taxes, and treated men and women as spiritual equals. In a world exhausted by ecclesiastical corruption, the Cathars offered an alternative, a Christianity that actually looked like Christ. The church's response was not self-examination, it was extermination. In 1209, Pope Innocent III declared a crusade, not against Muslims in the Holy Land, not against pagans in the Baltic, but against Christians in France. This was the first crusade specifically targeting fellow believers. Northern France was unleashed against the South. The family of Christendom went to war with itself. When the Crusaders reached Béziers on July 21st, 1209, Neptune, at 8 degrees Aries, a Scorpio degree, they asked the papal legate how to distinguish Cathars from Catholics. He allegedly replied, "Kill them all. God will know his own." They did. Nearly 20,000 people, men, women, children, Catholic and Cathar alike, were slaughtered in a single day. The Scorpio degree speaks death as soul sorting, transformation through annihilation. The shadow made so lethal that distinction became irrelevant. Destroy everyone and let God separate the guilty from the innocent in the afterlife. This is Neptune in Aries at its most naked. Divine authority invoked to justify mass murder. The projection so complete that you cannot even distinguish who deserves to die, so you kill everyone and let God sort the bodies. The Albigensian Crusade lasted 20 years. An estimated 1 million people died. Not for territory, not for resources, but because one group held up a mirror and another group found what they saw unbearable. The Cathars named the church's shadow, so the church declared the Cathars evil. The guilt the institution couldn't face became the heresy it was willing to kill 1 million people to destroy. This is the pattern. Those who name the shadow become the enemy. The corruption you refuse to acknowledge becomes the evil you project onto others. And once that projection is wrapped in divine authority, there's no limit to the violence it can justify. 1370 to 1384. 2 men, 1 God. The schism of identity. A century and a half later, Neptune returned to Aries as Christendom faced a different crisis, not of reform, but of singular authority. On March 27, 1378, Neptune at 17 degrees Aries, a Leo degree, Pope Gregory XI died, having just returned the papacy to Rome after 70 years of Babylonian captivity in Avignon. The cardinals elected Urban VI, an Italian, amid riots demanding a Roman pope or at least an Italian. But Urban proved erratic and abusive, reportedly berating and imprisoning cardinals who challenged him. The French cardinals declared his election invalid. In September 1378, they elected their own pope, Clement VII, who returned to Avignon. Christendom now had 2 men, each claiming to be God's singular representative on earth. The Leo degree speaks, this is a contest of kingship, one who wears the crown, of singular divine authority claimed by competing individuals, each insisting, I am the one. This was not a doctrinal dispute, it was a contest of individual divine legitimacy. Urban VI or Clement VII, which person carried the authentic connection to the sacred? Which I was real? Nations chose sides. France, Scotland, Castile, Aragon supported Avignon. England, Portugal, and the Italian states supported Rome. The schism lasted 36 years, not because the theology was complex, but because 2 individuals had spiritualized their claim to identity, and neither could surrender without annihilating his sense of self. When I am becomes I am God's chosen, compromise becomes apostasy. Negotiation becomes betrayal. The other must be destroyed because his existence threatens the foundation of your being. 1533 to 1548. The king becomes God. When the crown claimed the soul. 2 centuries later, Neptune entered Aries as the Protestant Reformation shattered medieval Christianity's unified authority, and different men reached for the pieces. On November 3rd, 1534, Neptune at 0 degrees Aries, the Aries degree in its purest form, Henry VIII's act of supremacy made him supreme head of the Church of England. The degree doubled Aries in Aries, the rawest possible assertion of individual divine authority. The medieval tenet that church and state were separate entities, with divine law standing higher than human law, was legislated out of existence. The individual sovereign had claimed direct divine authority. No pope, no intermediary. The king himself was the connection between England and God. Henry was his shadow made doctrine. Desire dressed as theology, appetite clothed in divine right. Thomas More was executed for refusing to acknowledge the claim. John Fisher, 18 Carthusian monks. The dissolution of the monasteries followed, the greatest redistribution of property since the Norman conquest. Not just economic reorganization, but physical destruction in the old spiritual order by a man who couldn't face his own hunger. The prophet dies, the warriors rise. In Germany, a different pattern was unfolding. Martin Luther had split Christendom with a declaration of radical individual conscience. Here I stand, I can do no other. This was Neptune in Aries at its most luminous. The individual soul standing before God without mediating institution, without priest or pope, without permission required. But Luther himself refused to sanction armed resistance. He repeatedly argued against war between the empire and the Protestant princes. He understood something about the shadow, that righteous violence is still violence, that conviction weaponized becomes its own kind of tyranny. Then Luther died, February 18th, 1546, Neptune at 25 degrees Aries, another Aries degree. The man who embodied "Here I stand" passed at the degree of individual courage, individual conscience, and with him went the restraint. His death, historians note, eliminated a major obstacle. Within months, the Schmalkaldic War erupted. Protestant princes against the Catholic emperor. The vision holder was gone. Those remaining had to act or watch the vision dissolve. The pattern: prophet dies, warriors rise. The one who could hold tension between conviction and restraint passes, and what remains is conviction without wisdom. Henry's "I am the supreme head" enslaves souls to the crown. Luther's "Here I stand" liberates them. Both claim individual authority over the sacred. The difference is whether divine authority is claimed from genuine conviction or manufactured to avoid the mirror. The lesson of this transit: Neptune in Aries produces both prophets and tyrants. 1697 to 1712, the blood of kings, when lineage became holy war. Neptune's next transit through Aries arrived as Europe tore itself apart over a question of divine inheritance. On November 1st, 1700, Neptune at 5 degrees Aries, a Leo degree, King Charles II of Spain died, without an heir, triggering the War of Spanish Succession. And again, the Leo degree, royal bloodlines, divine rights of kings, lineage as sacred identity. The conflict wasn't merely political, it was theological. Which bloodline carried the divine right to rule? The Bourbons or the Habsburgs? Whose lineage was sanctified by God? For 13 years, Europe bled. England, the Dutch Republic, and the Holy Roman Empire aligned against France and Spain. The fighting devastated the continent, not for territory alone, but for the principles of whose eye carried legitimate divine authority to govern. The Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, Neptune, now at 3 degrees Taurus, a Gemini degree, finally ended the conflict. Gemini, negotiation, treaties, written agreements, the resolution through communication rather than combat. The war that began at a Leo degree ended at a Gemini degree, from contest of kings to contract of nations. The treaty itself, the principle of balance of power over divine right. But the war had already revealed the pattern. When individual identity is wrapped in spiritual justification, compromise becomes impossible. Only exhaustion or annihilation can end the conflict. 1861 to 1875, brother against brother, when faith demanded fratricide. The most recent Neptune in Aries transit asks us to confront a disturbing question. How does a man become so base that he will kill his own brother, his own father, his own son? The American Civil War was not merely a political conflict. It was a psychological disintegration on a national scale. Brother against brother, families severed by a Mason-Dixon line that ran through dining rooms and churchyards. How does this happen? It happens when the shadow is spiritualized. The theological defense of slavery was not incidental to the Confederate cause. It was its psychological foundation. Southern preachers didn't merely tolerate slavery, they preached that it was ordained by God. The curse of Ham from Genesis, the argument that Africans were destined by divine will to serve. The claim that the hierarchical relationship between master and slave reflected God's natural order. But look beneath the theology and see the defense mechanism. The slaveholder knew. At some level, beneath conscious thought, he knew what he was doing was monstrous. He knew he was participating in an atrocity. That knowledge, that guilt, was unbearable. So he constructed a divine framework that transformed his cruelty into righteousness. He spiritualized his shadow so he didn't have to look at it. I'm not a monster. God made me to rule. My authority is sacred. This is Neptune in Aries at its most destructive. The projection of unintegrated guilt outward, wrapped in spiritual justification. And once the shadow is spiritualized, anyone who challenges it threatens not your property or your economy, but your soul. The abolitionist doesn't just oppose your politics, he exposes your guilt. He holds up a mirror to the basement you've been avoiding. That's when you can point a rifle at your own brother and pull the trigger. That's when the enemy stops being human and becomes the embodiment of everything you refuse to face in yourself. On April 12th, 1861, Neptune at 29 degrees Pisces, a Leo degree, Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter. Neptune had not yet crossed into Aries, but stood at the final degree of Pisces, the anaretic degree, the degree of crisis and culmination. But the degree was Leo, pride, identity, what you're willing to die for. The war began at the very last gasp of Neptune in Pisces, when everything that hadn't been integrated during 14 years of descent was about to erupt. The shadow that should have been faced in Pisces exploded into violence as Neptune prepared to cross the threshold. The war that followed killed 620,000 Americans, more than all other American wars combined. The Emancipation Proclamation didn't emerge because one man achieved enlightenment. It emerged because the pressure of 620,000 deaths made avoidance impossible. The nation was forced to name its shadow, not through wisdom, but through catastrophe. Not through voluntary descent into the unconscious, but through the unconscious erupting into the streets, setting everything ablaze until what had been burned could no longer be ignored. This is what happens when a nation refuses to face its collective shadow and then spiritualizes that refusal. 3 nations forged in fire. The American Civil War was not an isolated event. Neptune and Aries activated simultaneously across continents. The Kingdom of Italy was proclaimed on March 17, 1861, within weeks of Neptune's ingress. For centuries, Italy had been a geographic expression, not a nation. Giuseppe Garibaldi, described by historians as one of the great masters of guerrilla warfare, but equally important as a propagandist, transformed it through conviction made kinetic. His followers believed they were participating in a sacred mission. Venice was absorbed in 1866. Rome fell in 1870. A unified identity was forged through the fire of belief. Meanwhile, in Prussia, Otto von Bismarck declared, "Not through speeches and majority decisions will the great questions of the day be decided, but by iron and blood." Between 1864 and 1871, Bismarck orchestrated 3 wars against Denmark, Austria, and France to create the German Empire. On January 18th, 1871, Neptune at 19 degrees Aries, a Libra degree, the German Empire was proclaimed in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. The Libra degree speaks, identity defined through the other, the eye that emerges by looking into the mirror, and in this case, quite literally, a hall of mirrors. German identity was forged not in isolation, but in relation to France, through the defeat of the other in a room designed to reflect. 3 nations, 3 wars, 3 new collective identities forged because individuals believed their vision carried enough weight to die for and kill for. The question is never whether Neptune and Aries will produce a reimagination of reality. It always does. The question is whether that transformation emerges from integrated conviction or projected shadow. The pattern beneath the pattern. Across 5 transits, 8 centuries, the same psychological engine drives the historical events. Unprocessed shadow material erupts outward. Whatever guilt, shame, regret, and blame haven't been integrated demand expression. They will not stay buried. The shadow gets spiritualized. Instead of facing the guilt, we construct frameworks that make our projections righteous. The cruelty becomes God's will. The aggression becomes sacred duty. The mirror holders become heretics. Identity becomes spiritual. I am takes on divine weight. The self is no longer human and fallible, but chosen and infallible. The other becomes enemy. Anyone who challenges the spiritualized shadow threatens not your opinion, but your soul. They must be converted, conquered, or killed. Destruction precedes creation. Something must burn before something new can be built. The question is whether you will integrate your own shadow consciously or set fire to everything around you. The sweet spot. I don't say this with shame. Escapism is human, even necessary. You cannot stare into the abyss continuously. The psyche needs rest. I'm even grateful for my own years of numbing. Cannabis, alcohol, and screens each served a purpose at different points in my life. They helped me survive long enough to eventually choose something different. The line between rest and hiding, between relief and avoidance, is not always clear while you're inside it. I know there were moments when I crossed it without realizing. I also know there was something, call it intuition, call it grace, that kept guiding me back towards myself. There comes a point, however, when escape becomes too much of the reality, when growth stalls not because you aren't trying, but because there's no longer room to live inside what you're avoiding. This is what Neptune in Pisces was teaching, the sweet spot between avoidance and overwhelm. Not perfection, discernment. Learning to feel the difference between healthy release and compulsive hiding. Learning when the screen is rest and when it's running. 2025 to 2039. The fire we carry. Now the pattern returns. We've already tasted it. From March 30th through October 22nd, 2025, Neptune made its first foray into Aries before retrograding back into Pisces for one final pass through the depths. This was the preview, the warning shot. On January 26, 2026, Neptune enters Aries and stays for 13 years. For 14 years, Neptune in Pisces has been inviting us to descend, to face our guilt, our shame, our regret, our blame with compassion, to integrate the shadow through forgiveness rather than watch it erupt through violence. On January 26, 2026, the invitation evolves from compassionate descent to courageous action and self-love. Here is what changes. Aries rules the head. Neptune in Aries puts the shadow directly in front of your face. What you could submerge in Pisces, what you could swim around, dissolve into, avoid in the depths, now confronts you every time you look forward. Hiding becomes harder. The shadow demands to be seen. This is why the church killed the Cathars. The Cathars held up a mirror the church couldn't look away from. Rather than face what the mirror revealed, they destroyed the ones holding it. That is the shadow pattern of Neptune and Aries. When you cannot escape what confronts you, you try to annihilate whoever forces you to see it. Whatever you haven't faced will face you. Whatever guilt you haven't processed will become accusation. Whatever shame you haven't loved will become aggression. Whatever regret you haven't integrated will become blame aimed outward. And Neptune and Aries will provide the spiritual justification. Your shadow will feel like sacred purpose. Your projection will feel like divine mission. Your inability to look in the mirror will feel like courage to fight the enemy. This is how a man kills his brother. Not through clear-eyed assessment of irreconcilable differences, but through the spiritualization of what he cannot face in himself. The questions at the threshold. The Capricorn new moon on January 18th asked what you were ready to build. Neptune crossing on January 26th asks what you're carrying into the fire. The work is not complex. It is only difficult. What guilt have you been avoiding? Name it. Feel it. Let it be true without constructing a defense. What shame have you carried so long it feels like identity? It is not who you are. It is what happened to you and what you did when you didn't know better. Can you show that wounded self compassion and patience? What regret still festers? Not regret as punishment, regret as information. What does it teach you? What would you do differently? Can you forgive yourself for not knowing then what you know now? What blame have you assigned to avoid responsibility? Not everything is your fault, but in what ways can you accept accountability? Can you locate it without either drowning in guilt or deflecting into accusation? These questions are meant to guide you through this transit, supporting you in determining whether your fire warms your heart or burns your world around you. Because whatever you carry into Aries unexamined will find a target. Your spouse, your sibling, your neighbor, your nation. Neptune and Aries will hand you a spiritual justification for your projection, and you will believe you fight for truth when you are only fleeing your own reflection. The double possibility. Neptune in Aries is not a curse. It is a crucible. The same fire that consumed 620,000 Americans also forged the 13th Amendment. The same transit that produced Henry VIII's tyranny produced Luther's liberation. The same energy that drives crusade can also drive you to reimagine the very essence of who you are. The challenge is whether you have the courage and self-awareness to face the shadow before it faces you. But here is what you must understand. The work is never finished. There is no state of completion you achieve before January 26th that immunizes you from what follows. Neptune and Aries will generate new confusion about identity, even for those who have been doing the work faithfully. That is the nature of this transit. The ground of I am will shift beneath everyone's feet. If you did the work during Neptune and Pisces, if you descended into your depths, faced your shadow, practiced self-compassion through the guilt and shame and regret, that effort matters. You built muscle memory for self-examination. You developed tools. You are not starting from zero. But the Pisces work does not exempt you from the Aries work. Neptune in Pisces asks you to integrate shadow through compassionate descent. Neptune in Aries asks something different, to maintain coherence when your sense of self is being spiritualized and destabilized. The curriculum changes, The work continues. The key to navigating Neptune and Aries with grace will be bringing what was meant to be cultivated in Pisces, the capacity for self-love, the practice of gratitude, the willingness to face what's uncomfortable, and applying it to an entirely new challenge. What that space looks like differs from individual to individual. I'm not here to judge how much space, escapism, whatever form it takes, occupies your life. There were moments when clarity arrived unmistakably. In 2019, I realized that cannabis was no longer compatible with the relationship I was building with my now wife, and with my growth as a guide supporting others through astrology. The last time I used cannabis was October of that year. This past year, becoming a new father, I recognized that over 3 decades of alcohol use was enough. Not from crisis, but from coherence. I could feel that the relationship no longer belonged in my life, so I let it go. I'm grateful to have the ability to make such a seamless choice that is so challenging for so many. And I'm aware that the screen remains. The work continues. This is where self-love and gratitude become essential tools. Not self-love as achievement, self-love as practice. The daily return to compassion for the self that is confused, frightened, uncertain of who it is. Neptune and Aries will threaten your sense of identity. In those moments, can you love yourself through the confusion rather than armoring against it? Can you hold yourself with tenderness when you don't know who you are, instead of grasping for certainty by projecting your fear onto an enemy? Not gratitude as performance, gratitude as anchor. The recognition of what remains true even when identity feels unstable. When Neptune dissolves your sense of self, gratitude for the simple facts of existence can be the thread that keeps you from drowning. The soul's evolution is not destination. It is a continuous engagement, a commitment renewed daily, a practice you return to every time you lose it, which you will many times across these 13 years. The fire awaits. We stand at the threshold between invitation and demand. For 14 years, Neptune has been asking, will you descend? Will you face it? Will you love yourself through the guilt and the shame and the regret and the blame? That asking ends on January 26, 2026. What comes next is not invitation. It is eruption. The god of dreams enters the domain of war. The basement of the psyche is about to empty into the streets. And the question that has been asked every 165 years returns. When every unexamined shadow claims divine authority, whose fire prevails? The pattern is clear. The precedents are written in blood and birth. The archetype activates whether we acknowledge it or not. What remains is choice. Not whether to enter the fire, but whether you are committed to the ongoing practice of self-love and gratitude that will help you meet whatever the fire reveals, again and again, for as long as the transit lasts. The work is never done, but the work is always worth doing. Now pick up your tools. The fire awaits. I hope this message has been helpful to you. I want to express again my gratitude for you here with me listening. I'm grateful for your presence, and I look forward to reconnecting with you next week. Thank you for listening to the weekly transit. If you're curious to learn how these transits or any other transits may be affecting you, or if you're interested in learning more about your astrological code, contact me for a reading at theweeklytransit.com. This episode was produced by me, Scott Tajarian. Music written by Ben Leinbach, from Listen Deep by Amber Herzog-Lyman. Wishing you all the best as you ride the planetary waves.